The biggest twist yet in the race to the White House. U.S. President Joe Biden has finally called it quits as a Democratic contestant. He won't stand for re-election and he has named Vice President Kamala Harris to lead the Democratic Party's ticket against Donald Trump. Well, this comes after weeks of pressure from trusted lieutenants, former presidents, potential donors, Democrat lawmakers and senators, and also widespread public opinion. The 81-year-old president finally decided on Sunday morning to pass the torch, as many called it. President Biden tweeted a note addressed to my fellow Americans, saying he believed it to be in the best interests of the party and the country to stand down and focus on his duties as the president. He also said that he would be addressing the nation later this week. Minutes later, another message, this one addressed to my fellow Democrats. And he said, I'm quoting here, full support and endorsement of Kamala Harris to be the nominee of our party this year, unquote. Biden recalled that picking Kamala Harris as vice president in 2020 was his first decision as a party nominee. Over the last few weeks, Vice President Kamala Harris has acted as the White House's first line of defense, particularly after Biden's faltering and uneven debate performance in the first presidential debate against Trump. 59-year-old Harris is the first woman, first black person, and first person of South Asian descent to serve as the U.S. Vice President. Harris said she intends to earn and win the nomination and do everything in her power to unite the country to defeat Donald Trump. The Vice President and other Democratic Party leaders have expressed strong praise for Biden for what they called his extraordinary leadership, dedicated service for the United States of America. Well, Harris has already got endorsement from former President Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton, besides 79 of Democrat leaders as per a YouGov poll. But there's no clear support from former President Barack Obama, indicating a hesitation among several Democrats in accepting Harris as the party's White House nominee. Obama only tweeted that Democrats will name an outstanding nominee. Well, it promises to be a long road ahead for the Democratic camp as it heads into its national convention on the 19th of August.
Candid conversation.
And for more on this, we're now being joined by Voice of America correspondent Chris Cascio, live from Washington, D.C. We're also being joined by our correspondent Susan Tehrani, who's joining us live from New York. My first question is to you, Chris. The pertinent question being here in everybody's mind is what led to this change, this decision? Because until 24 hours ago, Biden was adamant to be in the race and said that as soon as his COVID-19 quarantine is over, he will be back in the campaign trail. So what exactly changed?
Well, Biden had been feeling the pressure for weeks from top Democrats, and he went into isolation with COVID on Wednesday, forcing him off the campaign trail, which gave him time to think as he's staying at his home in Delaware and recuperating. And at 1:45 Eastern Daylight Time, he posted his statement on social media. Now, top Biden aides had found out just a minute before. There was no warning to top Democrats. And of course, the turning point in his candidacy was that poor debate performance against Donald Trump 3 weeks ago, when he was, halting and seemed to lose his train of thought and couldn't really answer questions effectively. And since then, more than 36 Democrats have called for him to step down because it would hurt other Democrats running for key seats in the Senate and the House. And also key donors had started to cut off their donations to the Biden-Harris campaign in the past few days.
Right, Chris, coming to you, Susan. How do you think this decision will resonate amongst the Americans? It just comes few days before the Democratic National Convention. Do you think that the anti-Trump clan will perhaps now favor the Democrats with this decision?
So you have the Never Trumpers. They'll back whoever that ultimately is the party's nominee, which we don't know if it's Kamala Harris right now, although she has overwhelming support. But then you have those independent voters and then voters in America's swing states. Whether or not they are going to be convinced, should Harris be the nominee, that she's best fit to go against Donald Trump or not is yet to be seen. So far, we haven't seen her head-to-head either with J.D. Vance that we thought was going to happen, or possibly if she becomes the nominee, head-to-head with President Joe Biden on a debate stage. So there are a lot of questions right now. And the biggest question, two biggest questions are, first of all, we don't know really why Biden decided to step aside. Is it his health? Is it because of something else? Or is it because he thought that he wasn't going to win? If it's because he thought that he wasn't going to win, well, that's, he's going to face criticism for that, because you don't change the rules in halftime after 14, 15 million Americans already voted for you because you just simply think you cannot win. So I'd be very surprised if he comes out and says that's the reason. Another very important issue that is going to come up, not only among Republicans that they are going to move forward with something like this, but voters are going to be asking themselves, well, if he's not fit enough to campaign, is he fit enough to run the country for another 5 months or so? And I think those are the questions that a lot of independent voters, not those never Trumpers, not hardcore Democrats, but others are asking themselves right now.
And just to follow up on that, you do make a point there that there will be questions raised on if Biden is not fit to run for the White House race, whether he's fit to govern the country for the next 6 months, which comes to a question that, do you think that he will perhaps ease into a lame duck presidency for the remainder of his tenure? What's your assessment of that?
He's a lame duck president right now. There is no doubt about it. The way people are praising Biden, if you look at all of the praises since he announced that he's stepping aside of the campaign, it appears that Biden is all of a sudden going into retirement and we're never going to see him again. Now, his supporters might argue that he's going to be more energized. We're going to see a lot more of him now that his schedule is not so full with campaigning. But what we're seeing, and these, what's happening on the surface does matter. The way they're sending him off and praising him, it appears that, this is Biden's retirement party ultimately. And I'm not sure whether or not that's a smart move. I also don't think it may not be a smart move for him to agree to step aside as president, and then you have someone like Kamala Harris, who may become the nominee, become the president. That means the Republicans, Donald Trump, would be running once again against an incumbent. She would be President Harris. So that's something to look out for as well.
Right, Susan, stay with us. We're also now being joined by Spencer Critchley, a former communication advisor on the Obama campaign and author of the book Patriots of Two Nations, Why Trump Was Inevitable and What Happens Next. Thank you so much for being with us here today, Mr. Critchley. I want to ask you that the Democratic elites have perhaps not endorsed Kamala Harris. Biden has endorsed her as the party's nominee to face Donald Trump. Even Barack Obama has not mentioned her name in the tweet. He's only rather lauded Biden and said that an outstanding nominee will be chosen from the Democratic camp. Your assessment of that?
Including, I believe, all of the major potential rivals for Kamala Harris, if there had been a primary, say, some months ago. And I think that former President Obama's holding back on endorsing her matches his typical pattern, which is to wait for the party to make a choice so that when he gives his endorsement, and he has to be aware of the enormous weight that endorsement carries, it's a full endorsement of the party's nominee, as opposed to the situation that might exist if he had endorsed one candidate and another candidate turns out to be the nominee. I think Democrats are feeling extremely relieved at the same time as they feel very sad about President Biden leaving the race today, because their worst nightmare would have been a very divisive fight amongst multiple candidates at a time when the party could not afford that. And instead, what appears to be happening is the party is very quickly uniting behind Vice President Harris.
Right, Mr. Krishley, just news coming in that the Democratic donors have expressed their happiness and elation at Harris's potential nomination. Talk to us about how the Clintons have perhaps endorsed Harris and not Barack Obama. Do you think this will complicate things going forward for the Democratic camp?
No, I don't think so. As I say, I fully expect former President Obama to endorse her the moment she becomes the nominee, should that happen. And as I say, this fits his previous pattern when there's potentially more than one Democratic nominee. I don't think he has ever endorsed one in advance of the nomination. So that doesn't surprise me. You mentioned the enthusiasm of the donors, and that appears to be from top to bottom. The campaign is reporting, last I heard, $30 million and counting raised today. And it looks like it may be setting a record for the largest amount any Democratic campaign has ever raised in a single day. As I say, I think there's a combination of great sadness today about the terribly difficult choice that President Biden had to make, but enormous relief that the party appears to be very quickly coming together and uniting as one voice, which I think really is not that surprising given the stakes. This really is a choice. Often people in political campaigns, especially presidential campaigns, make these claims that this is the most important election of our lifetime. This is one of those cases when it's very likely true, because this is a choice between America continuing as a liberal democracy as it's been since its founding, or veering off track towards authoritarianism, and really, if Trump has his way, outright autocracy, where the only purpose of the country would be to serve his impulse of the moment.